Chapter 19. The wind moved slowly across the open fields, brushing through dry grass and low shrubs with a soft sound that seemed louder than it should have been in the silence. The isolation around the farmhouse felt unnatural. From the ridge overlooking the property, Malik and the team watched. The farmhouse stood alone in the middle of a wide stretch of land, its wooden structure aged but sturdy. A faint yellow glow escaped from two windows on the ground floor, while the rest of the house remained dark. A narrow gravel road curved toward the entrance, disappearing into the night beyond the property line. Malik lowered the binoculars slowly. "2 guards outside," he murmured. "Same rotation we've been seeing, one near the porch, the other circling the side of the barn." Alexander stood beside him, his eyes fixed on the house as if staring long enough might allow him to see through the walls. Somewhere inside that building, his son was sleeping. After 2 weeks of watching the farmhouse through scopes, cameras, and long nights of surveillance, they knew the basic routine of the place. They knew when the guards changed shifts, when lights turned off, when vehicles arrived and left. They knew Max was being kept somewhere upstairs, but they didn't know which room. Malik crouched beside a rough map of the property spread across the hood of their SUV. Karam stood on the opposite side, studying the layout. "The rear generator housing is still our best entry point," Karam said quietly. "Camera blind spot, 30-second window between sweeps." Malik nodded. 2 men neutralized the perimeter guards. His eyes shifted towards Alexander. "You stay behind the breach team." The words came out firm, leaving little room for argument. Alexandra's gaze remained fixed on the house. "No," Malik frowned slightly. "I'm serious," he said. "You don't go inside." Alexander finally turned to look at him. Malik continued before he could respond. "You're not trained for this, you're not familiar with clearing structures. If something goes wrong in there, hesitation will cost us seconds. Seconds cost lives." His tone was calm, but the tension behind it was unmistakable. "I'll send Karam," Malik added. "He's done this 100 times. Alexandra's jaw tightened. "No," the single word carried more weight this time. Malik exhaled slowly, irritation creeping into his expression. "Alexander, I'm going." Malik stared at him for a long moment before stepping closer, his voice dropping. Why right now? There was genuine frustration in the question. They had come this far carefully. Every step had been planned, calculated, controlled. This was not the moment for emotion to interfere, but Alexander did not look uncertain. He met Malik's gaze directly. "Because Max will only come with me." The answer was simple. But it was also absolute. Malik remained silent. Alexander continued, his voice quieter now. "You've seen the surveillance footage. You've heard the recordings." His throat tightened slightly before he forced the words forward. "My son has been surrounded by strangers for months, people who took him. People who kept him hidden." His eyes drifted back towards the farmhouse. "If a stranger walks into that room in the middle of the night and tries to pull him away, he will panic." The thought alone made Alexandra's chest tighten. "He won't understand what's happening. He will scream, he will fight." Malik said nothing. Alexander looked back at him. "But if he sees me, he will know." His voice softened. "He will trust me." For a moment the wind was the only sound between them, then Alexander spoke again. "I need to do this myself," he said with firmness as if to convince himself. Malik studied him carefully, searching his face as if weighing something deeper than the risk of the operation itself. Finally, he rubbed his hand across his jaw and sighed. "It's a risk," he admitted, then he looked Alexander directly in the eye. "But I trust you." Alexander shook once. Malik turned to Karam. "Change of plan," he said. Karam raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Malik continued issuing instructions. "Perimeter guards first, silent, rear entry after generator sweep." He glanced back at Alexander. "You stay directly behind Karam until we reach the staircase." Alexander acquiesced. "And once you're upstairs," Malik added, "you move carefully. We know Max is in one of the rooms up there, but we still don't know which one. I will find him." Malik held his gaze for another second, then he gave a small nod. "All right." Minutes later the mission began. The guards outside the farmhouse had settled into the routine of the night, their movements slow and mundane after hours of uneventful watch. The stillness of the countryside had made them careless, and they never noticed the figures approaching from the darkness. Malik's men moved with careful precision, timing their steps perfectly with the guard's patrol pattern they had studied for days. One guard had barely shifted his stance near the porch when a shadow appeared behind him, a firm grip restraining him as a tranquilizer dart struck his shoulder. The drug worked almost instantly, draining his strength before he could even react, and he collapsed silently to the ground. At the same time, Karam intercepted the second guard near the barn, disorienting him with a swift movement before administering another dart. The man barely managed a startled breath before losing consciousness. Within seconds, both guards were down without making a sound. Karam dragged them into the shadows and signaled the team forward. Near the rear wall, the generator hummed, its noise masking the soft creak of the service door as it was carefully opened. Using the sound as cover, Alexander slipped quietly inside the farmhouse. The air inside the farmhouse was warmer than outside, carrying the faint smell of dust and old wood. Alexandra's heartbeat seemed impossibly loud in his ears. He moved slowly down a narrow corridor illuminated by a single dim light. Every step felt deliberate. Every creak of the floorboards made Alexander hold his breath. This was no longer planning. This was real and very much happening. A storm of emotions churned inside him, making every step feel heavier than the last. Fear gripped him tightly that made his heart pound loudly in his chest, and his breath come shorter than usual. One wrong move, one unexpected sound, and everything they had planned could collapse in seconds. Yet beneath that fear lived a stronger hope, a fragile, almost terrifying happiness. For months he had lived with the unbearable thought that he might never see his son again, and now Max was only a few rooms away. The possibility of finally reaching him filled Alexander with a trembling hope, so powerful it almost frightened him. At the end of the corridor, Alexander saw the wooden steps climbing into darkness. He moved then. The staircase creaked slightly under his weight, but the sound blended with the low hum of the generator outside. At the top, the hallway stretched in two directions. He could see 4 white doors in 2 different directions, all closed. It was so quiet that only the faint ticking of a clock could be heard somewhere downstairs. He approached the first door slowly. His hand hovered over the handle. His pulse pounded in his ears. If this was the wrong room, everything could collapse. He inhaled slowly. For a moment he froze, his hand hovering in the air but unable to move. According to the information Malik's team had gathered, Max had to be in one of the rooms on this floor, but which one, no one had been able to confirm. The silence of the house pressed heavily around him as his mind raced through possibilities. He looked at the first door, then slowly turned his gaze to the second one a few steps away. Doubt crept in. What if he chose wrong? What if someone else was inside? His heartbeat grew louder as he stepped towards the second door, convincing himself it might be the safer choice. But the closer he got, the more something inside him felt unsettled, an uneasy instinct he couldn't explain. He stopped just before reaching it, his chest tightening with a strange certainty that this wasn't the right one. After a brief moment of hesitation, he slowly turned back towards the first door. Standing before it again, he took a shaky breath, as if silently asking for strength, and finally reached for the handle. The door opened. It was a bathroom. He closed it carefully. The other door stood across the hall. Alexander walked towards it slowly. His mind raced. What if Max wasn't here? What if they had moved him? What if? He stopped. No, he forced the thoughts away. He needed to focus. He reached for the second door and paused, whispered a prayer to a god he had stopped believing in long ago. Please, then he opened it. The room was dimly lit by a small night lamp, and there on the bed was Max. Alexander froze. His son lay curled beneath a thin blanket, sleeping peacefully as if the world outside the room did not exist. One small hand rested beneath his cheek. A familiar habit, a habit Max had copied from him as a toddler. The sight made Alexandra's chest tighten painfully. Beside the boy lay a small pillow shaped like a toy car. His name was stitched across the fabric. Max, and the boy was clutching it tightly in his arms. Alexandra's eyes blurred instantly. He had imagined this moment for months, feared it, dreamed about it, and now he was standing only a few feet away. His son was here, alive, safe, and well. For a second he nearly stepped forward, but instinct stopped him. Someone else could be in the room. Quickly, he slipped behind a large wooden desk near the wall and crouched down. He forced himself to breathe slowly. Seconds passed that felt like an eternity before he decided to step up. But before he did, he pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a message. Found him. Outside, Malik's phone vibrated. He read the message. Then released a long breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. Malik looked toward the team waiting beside him and gave them a small thumbs up. Inside the farmhouse, Alexander finally allowed himself to look towards the bed again. Max slept peacefully, unaware that the nightmare was about to end. Before entering the farmhouse, Malik and Alexander had spent hours discussing the most delicate part of the operation. Malik had made one thing very clear during their planning. "Max will recognize you," he had said quietly, looking directly at Alexander. "He will come with you, but you have to remember something, he's still a child." For months he has been living in a place he doesn't understand, surrounded by strangers and rules he never chose. If he suddenly wakes up in the middle of the night and sees people trying to take him away, even if one of them is you, his first reaction may not be trust. Malik paused for a moment before continuing more firmly. He could panic, he could hesitate, he might even be too frightened to move, and if that happens, you can't rush him. You'll have to explain things to him calmly and give him a moment to understand what's happening. Let him see that it's really you. Let him feel safe enough to choose to come with you. Because if Max reacted in fear, like screaming, struggling, or calling for someone, the entire operation could unravel in seconds. The last thing they needed was chaos. What they needed was patience, reassurance, and just enough time for a frightened child to believe that his father had truly come to take him home. Max needed to understand what was happening. He needed to leave willingly, so the plan had been simple. Alexander would wake him gently, give him a moment to process. Explain quietly that they were leaving and what was happening or could happen. Only then would they move. Now, standing inside the dim bedroom, Alexander approached the bed slowly. Max was so close now that Alexander could hear his soft breathing. He simply stood there for some seconds, looking down at him. Alexander knelt beside the bed. His hand trembled slightly as he reached forward and touched Max's shoulder. "Max," he whispered softly. The boy stirred, his brow furrowed slightly as sleep loosened its grip. "Max," Alexander said again, barely louder than breath. Max blinked slowly, his eyes opened. For a moment they looked unfocused. Then they settled on the figure sitting beside him and widened. He stared, completely still, as if his mind couldn't quite understand what it was seeing. Alexander felt his throat tighten. The longing in his son's eyes was almost unbearable. Max's lips trembled slightly. Tears instantly filled his eyes. Before he could make a sound, Alexander leaned forward and wrapped his arms around him. "Shush," he whispered quickly. "No sound." His voice was gentle but urgent. Max stiffened for only a moment before burying his face against his father's shoulder. Alexander held him tightly. He wanted to cry, wanted to hold him forever. But he forced himself to stay calm. "Listen to me," he whispered. "You have to stay quiet, okay?" Max waggled quickly against him. Then he pulled back slightly and looked up at his father. His voice was barely audible. "I've been waiting for you." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Max swallowed, his eyes shining. "I knew you would come," he whispered, "just like right now." A small breath escaped him. "I dreamed about it." For a while neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other. Alexander saw everything in that silence. The fear Max had endured, the loneliness of a child without his father, his papa. And the hope he had somehow held on to. Inside, Alexander wanted to ask 1,000 questions, wanted to hold him and cry and promise that nothing would ever hurt him again.